you find someone who's hungry, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to grind it out. And they may not know exactly what needs to be done, but they're going to go and figure it out. That's their personality, and that's what they're going to do.
Welcome to Tech Teams Today. Today, we are joined by Logan Connors, a product technology and operations executive who's built and led teams across healthcare, SaaS, finance, and venture capital. From scaling a 200 plus person global org at Azova to now leading both tech and security at Healthyr, Logan brings a rare perspective that bridges deep technical fluency with strategic leadership. Logan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first question, you've worked across a variety of industries, healthcare, finance, SaaS, venture capital. What stayed consistent across all of those different teams?
That's a good question. Really, ultimately, what it comes down to and staying consistent is, I'd say understanding your employees, right? So even though you're building something across the finance sector, whether it's SaaS, healthcare, right? At the end of the day, it comes to finding core individuals, and ultimately finding the best individuals, finding a problem solver, right? So, I've kind of found that we always teeter on experience, right? But at the end of the day, the way that you can build great teams across multiple sectors, and this is just kind of like a universal principle of finding someone who is a problem solver and, more or less has that chip on their shoulder, needs something to prove. You find those qualities in an individual. It doesn't matter what you're building, right? Because you're going to find a problem, you're going to solve it. At the end of the day, the different sectors is just based on a different problem that we're solving. So, I'd say that's what stays consistent in building great teams. And that's really kind of the keystone in staying successful when it comes to creating companies, creating teams, etc. Just find those core individuals.
And at Healthier, you're the vice president of technology and the chief information security officer. How do you sort of balance velocity and innovation, those dual responsibilities, especially with something so sensitive like health data?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when you're when you're in that startup phase, you kind of have the startup where you've got a few employees, and then you kind of grow into the awkward teenager phase where you're trying to be mature, but you're just not there resource wise. And then overall start growing into a kind of that large behemoth classic organization. I guess the way that we handle it is the growth really comes, in all honesty, prior to having customers, right? So when you are building a product and you are getting it ready to have that beta, that MVP, you don't have that looming security issue overhead. Now, you still need to build with security in mind, but because you're not working with customer data at that point, right? It's something that you can come back to and make a priority once the MVP is built. So you kind of do it in a way where you're developing and building the product. Again, security in mind, you want to avoid code debt. We don't want to have to backtrack. But once you get that product up to a MVP, and what we want is, a little better than an MVP, right? A lovable product. Then at that point, we can kind of backtrack into security, button up, tie up loose ends, and make sure ultimately that it is going to be more secure, because security creates barriers. It just inherently does. I mean, any type of compliance framework that you're working around, every single aspect of it is a barrier, right? And that's what makes us secure. You look at a simplistic aspect of two-factor authentication. I mean, two-factor authentication creates a barrier, something additional you have to do to get to where you want to be. So it's the same thing. So from a strategic standpoint, if you run as fast as you can before you are in possession of that data, that client data, the better off you are going to be. So that's kind of how you manage that. So once you get to that awkward teenage phase, out of the startup phase, that's when security becomes more important, and it's more in play, because then you have to get that security structure, those audits in place in order to obtain customers. Is kind of how it works. So, and what I've seen.
And so, as VP of tech, does product fit into your wheelhouse as well, or is that a separate function in your org?
It is. At Healthyr specifically, I manage a lot of the technology, so the internal tools, operational aspects of a company, of the company itself. But there's also a hand in product, right? So if you are building a tech product, your security and what you're maintaining is what you're collecting through your product, as opposed to maybe something that's more like service based or operational, which would be, like in the healthcare, a hospital or something of that nature, where they're not the technology that's running their operations, right? They are the process of it. So when it's on the tech side of things, you have to focus on the product because that is where all of the data collection is. And then you are having other organizations and companies that use your platform. So you're responsible for not only your own internal process, like you would like on an on-site company using someone else's software, but you're responsible for maintaining the security across the board for your other clients. So it's there. There's some large overlap, right? So what I would consider as being like a technical product, which is kind of bridges the gap between internal technical operations, let's say product support, security infrastructure, right, that facilitates the product. Then that kind of rolls into development, and then you roll into the product side, which is more of like your marketing and your sales, where they're defining and building out the visualizations, identifying what needs to be built in the product. And then you've got the teams behind which are executing and figuring out how to build out that vision, if that makes sense. So that's kind of where they all come together. So yeah, being a tech product company, everything is centralized around product. It's just what piece of that product are you contributing to in this particular case.
That makes sense. And you've scaled sort of multiple companies through pretty intense growth phases. What's something you think leaders consistently underestimate during that kind of hyper growth?
I mean, what haven't I underestimated, to be perfectly honest? I mean, the craziest thing I've been a part of was COVID. And, that's where I got into healthcare software and helped scale, some of the other companies that I've been a part of, Azova being one of them. But you underestimate almost everything from a startup perspective. When you are a startup, you have all the hope in the world, right? You're trying to facilitate and create this dream, and you feel like you're unstoppable and you're moving at a million miles a minute. And I think the biggest thing you underestimate is that, one, just how long stuff takes. And I say that because you understand the end goal of where you're trying to get to. And a lot of times you are going to overlook all of the little tiny incremental steps that it takes to actually get to that finish line. So you're running as fast as you can, but you're not realizing that, oh, this wasn't a sprint on a flat track. It's actually an obstacle course. And you've got ladders, you've got mud, you've got walls to climb. And I think that that's what gets underestimated. And it's a little bit of a mirage. You think you're at the end and you get there and then you realize that you're really far away from it. And it kind of consistently takes forever. So, if you have this dream as an entrepreneur to build something, if you think that you can do it in 2 years, triple the time, and that's where you're actually going to be once you get there. So I would say 100% that is the thing that I've found myself constantly underestimating. Even though I've done it multiple times now, it's still something we fall into.
Yeah, we had a previous guest who has like the 90-90 rule, which is pretty unique, which is whenever you think you're 90% done with something, you have another 90% to go.
Yeah,
Which pretty counterintuitive,
that's
but
very
also
true.
actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It does. Well, and the
So
hard
at
thing is too is that
Azova,
90% split too, and it just keeps going. So
right. So at Azova, you built a 200 plus person remote services team across 4 countries. What worked? What didn't? What were some of the lessons learned from that?
yeah, I mean that's a loaded one for sure. So when it comes to scaling in a remote-based company, I mean your hardest thing is obviously keeping individuals, especially when you're across oceans, keeping them engaged, keeping them working, keeping them efficient, and also to kind of fighting the barriers of limitations of not being on site. So internet outages. I mean, we had a very large team in the Philippines. When they'd have their typhoons come through, internet services would go down, power would go down. So kind of dealing with just some of the basic infrastructure that I think we kind of take for granted and overlook here in the States. It was one of those things that took a lot more effort to really try to figure out and make work, if that makes sense. So it's like you spend a lot of time kind of cutting those costs from an operational financial perspective, but then there's other things that come into play that you don't factor in that ultimately add to that cost. I guess the one thing at Azova specifically, I would say when it came to scaling teams, I talked about how the way that you find a good team is you find the problem solvers, you find someone who's hungry, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to grind it out. And they may not know exactly what needs to be done, but they're going to go and figure it out, right? That's their personality, and that's what they're going to do. A lot of times you will find that in younger individuals, right? So someone who's maybe been in the workforce for a few years, they still have stuff to prove. They are smart by just God-given talents, right? But I think the thing that I found that did not work through this was making those individuals managers. When it comes to getting work done, as I mentioned already, those are the best individuals to have. But when it comes to nurturing and growing and bringing a team together to be effective, requires an experienced individual in dealing with individuals as employees, as people.
Right.
Uh, the best way that you're going to get, that coming to, what did work, I guess, in that sense. So it didn't work for me to have these young, hungry individuals be leaders of these other teams, right? And even though, like our Philippines or our teams in Mexico were making less money, their experience, their maturity was greater than those that were here in the States that were younger, right? So would I say their output was greater than them? No, but unfortunately you start running into egos, you start running into these, not understanding how to handle someone, and I think the best manager, honestly, people have been parents, right? A parent, you're a glorified manager of your kids, but that didn't work. And that was something I learned pretty quick. And I've actually seen that in multiple, I've tried it a couple times in a couple different companies, and it usually comes down to the same thing where, they start ending up butting heads. Instead of having an empathetic, nurturing viewpoint, it's becomes more of a hammer and nail scenario. So without a doubt, that was like kind of like our biggest hindrance and kind of set us back a little bit until we figured that out.
Yeah, it's hard to have someone with a chip on their shoulder managing people with a chip on their shoulder, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you've held leadership roles across product, ops, sales, engineering. How do you get those sort of departments aligned and moving in the same direction?
Communication, right? So I've been running remote companies aside from another one that's I invested in when I sold out of my first tech company, which is an appliance installation company. Actually, it's not even in the tech space, but communication is key. And the only way that you can keep individuals in sync with or in line with the vision is to have constant communication. And this isn't just like communicating when stuff comes up, right? It comes down to forcing communication. So what I do with all of my teams is regardless whether we like it or not, we have a morning meeting, and it's not just a stand up where it's like, hey, give me a 30-second overview of what you're doing for the day, right? It's not a high level. It's a very much this is a working session, and we're going to work through it collectively as a group. So when you are remote, you're not forced into a situation like you would be at an office space. So you have to force that collaboration effort within these scheduled calls. So I know a lot of individuals say, "Oh, I've got meetings. I'm the chief meeting officer. All I do is sit in meetings." Well, when you're in meetings, you're getting stuff done. And it's to the question you just asked is how do you align everyone? You make sure that everyone's working together in a collaborative effort, and then they can spin off and work on tasks. But at the end of the day, you got to make sure you come back because if you don't, you'll end up working in silos. And once departments start working in silos, you start getting assumptions that are incorrect. You start getting, oh, I thought, well, they were working on it. Well, I thought they were working on it. And things start to fall apart. So it's a simple answer, but the key thing is constant communication.
And speaking of meetings, you've been in the room for some pretty high stakes decisions. What's sort of your mental framework for making tough trade-offs under pressure?
An
Take your
interesting
take your
question.
time.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's kind of dependent upon some of the situations. So I've been in high stake situations where it's been like exiting a company, and those are positive high stakes, and those are the easy ones. Yeah, typically when you think high stake, that's when you have something to lose, and that's usually a negative meeting. And it comes down to some core decisions. If I were to give advice when it comes to those high stake meetings, first and foremost, one is you've got to leave emotions at the door. If you get emotional, then you're going to cloud judgment. And usually in those situations, that's what causes you to succeed or fail in really those larger decisions. So data. Stick to data, stick to numbers, stick to a plan, stick to things that are tangible that you can analyze and rationalize, not be emotional about, right? So when it comes to both positive and negative high stake decisions, so like if you're selling a company, stick to your numbers, stick to what you've been looking for. I think the other thing is don't rush the decision. I think too often we get into that situation where we want it to just be over and we just want to make a decision, we just want to clear it and be done with it. But don't rush the decision and don't allow yourself to be forced to rush it. If you have to take an extra second to say, hey, look, let me sit back and just think about this for a second. If you guys got to schedule another meeting the next day, if that's possible, or have it go long, do that. Just make sure that you aren't rushing something and then at the end regretting that you rushed and didn't think through, all aspects of what you were deciding. So.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And, switching gears a little bit, you've designed software across multiple startups. What's sort of your approach on deciding what to build, what not to build, or maybe hold off on, especially nowadays when there's so much hype around AI?
Yeah. When it comes to being an entrepreneur, going back to I think kind of the core message here of the way that I run businesses, it's being a problem solver, right? So every single startup, when they look to solve a problem, right? If you solve a problem that a lot of people have, then you become a very successful company. If you solve a problem that a small population of people have, then you become a very niche company. And if you're trying to solve a problem that no one has or no one sees as a problem, you're a failing company because no one's going to buy your service. So when it comes to the decision to build one, you've got to understand the problem at hand and identify like what is the size of this problem, right? And I want to break that down real quick because healthcare and like in Healthyr, and I want to give a good example. There are problems that are apparent, but then there's an aspect of that is that people have to want to solve that problem. So in healthcare, let's talk about physical fitness. If I go to someone who is overweight, doesn't diet, doesn't exercise, and I tell them, you've got a problem, you're probably going to die unless you take care of this, guess what? They're probably going to be like, yeah, I know, whatever. Right? It's not a problem that they want to solve. And Stacy, our CEO, has this amazing vision, and what we're doing is very, very cool in terms of care navigation. But at the end of the day, too, right, we've got to, or I guess let me backtrack. What we've seen is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? We provide this amazing tool to get them there, to better their lives. But if they're not willing to do it, then they won't. So I've seen that in a couple failed startups where I've identified a problem and it's a clear problem and it needs to be fixed and we've come up with a good solution. But if the target audience isn't willing to fix it, then it doesn't get fixed no matter what you do, right? So then it comes down to are you good enough at a marketing and sales tactic to convince them that they need to fix this problem and convince them to fix it. And that is much easier said than done, right? It usually takes a pretty large effort. And we saw some of that happen with COVID. I mean, we literally had a global pandemic where we saw individuals start bracing telehealth and wanting to be better. I mean, it literally caused, it had to be caused by a global pandemic. And even still, that happened for a couple years and then everyone has gone back to the way that it was because those things are hard, right? So, when it
Yeah.
comes to figuring it out, find the problem to solve, and it needs to be a problem that people want solved, and you'll find success.
So shifting to engineering a little bit, how, if it has at all, how has your definition of a great engineer evolved over the last few years?
It's evolved multiple times. A great engineer is someone who doesn't have an ego. That's really what it comes down to. Because as an engineer, you are supposed to take, your user story, the defined aspect of the feature, the functionality of what you're supposed to build, and you need to build it and, build it in a way that is one functional. It's gonna last, right? You want to do a good job. But what I found with some of our when I get developers that have more of a entrepreneurial mindset, maybe they've got that chip on their shoulder I mentioned, or those aspects, right? They start to have too much opinions about what the product or service needs to be, as opposed to developing what has already been decided in terms of planning from the product team. So when you get that, you start to get they kind of start to give you friction in terms of building it. You say, let's build it. We're going to build it this way. This is, we talk to our customers. This is what they want built. So we're going to build it. And they'll come back and be like, well, why are we building that? That's dumb. We don't need to build that. That's not an issue. So I used to look at it where I wanted that person where I could just give them as a developer and just say, here's run with it. Here's my high level. Here's my things. Take it and run with it. But at the end of the day, I found that came back to bite me, because when you do that, you're not going to get what you want. You're not going to get what you mapped out. You're not going to solve the problem you originally set out to solve. And developers are very, very smart individuals, right? Maybe not so much, the joke's probably not so much socially, but when it comes to mathematics and building stuff out, very intelligent. But they look at problems in a different way. They're not looking at it from a basic, individual, everyday, average person. They're looking at it with their IQ of, 130 or 140 or whatever it is, and they're like, yeah, no, I don't care how it looks. I want it to do this and this and this with all this functionality. And they realize, no, you got to dial it back. So in a good developer, it's someone who's going to set aside the ego, and I don't even know if ego is the proper term there, but they're basically willing to implement and build what they're instructed to build and find value in that, in their role on what's being done, as opposed to fighting against what that they're being told, because then it just causes contention, and then your product just doesn't get to where it needs to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. It can get to a point where there's too much autonomy for sure.
Yeah.
With AI in the loop, what technical skills are becoming less important, and what soft skills do you think are becoming more critical?
I think I think soft skills, every soft skill is going to be that much more important, because that's the human value, right? That's the human aspect of what we do every day. AI, from a technical perspective, what is going to have to adapt is you are going to have to, in the workforce, we're going to see an increase in individuals knowing how to use and control AI, and then they're going to have to be able to communicate that to others that don't know how to use it, or not as technical. But AI is going to replace a lot of engineering-based roles. It just is. Now, on the flip side, I have already seen it where, again, have the appliance installation company, which is just not software, but we're already seeing a rise in individuals getting back into like the physical labor and the workforce there, construction, etc. That came from technology industries, and there isn't as many jobs available, because AI is replacing the efficiency of the individuals. So from a technical perspective, and if you want to stay in software, you're going to need to become an expert on how to utilize and how to integrate AI, basically be an AI manager, so to speak, to stay there. And then you've got to sharpen up your soft skills, and that's all of them, right? You've got to be able to communicate and work with individuals, balance the sales aspect, the customer service aspect, and aid in that human touch, which just AI it's not going to do in our lifetime. The conversation that you and I are having right now could do, right?
What's something you used to believe about building teams that you've since changed your mind about, maybe?
I mean, it's kind of loaded like with the kind of tied into the Azova thing, where like I can get someone who's hungry and build a team and have them be a leader and pull people along. Whereas I found that there are individuals that have that are the best doers, but they're not the best leaders. So when it comes to building teams, when I'm trying to get a leader, I want someone who's calm. Someone who's puts off a maturity aspect. I'm not talking about age, right? But they've got a matureness about them that allows them to listen, and then build a team around them. So if you can partner those doers, those chips on the shoulders underneath someone who's calm, who listens to them, who gives them the flexibility that they need, then you're going to have a successful team. I think another thing that I found when it comes to building teams, I was always so nervous to try and develop trust in new individuals. So I kind of, as I built these companies, I started like moving, like as I'd move on to the next one, I'd pull like my key employees that have worked with me to the next job, to the next job, to the next job, and I kind of have this following of individuals. And one of the things, and I kind of felt like I'd already established trust and I'd already found the individuals that I needed to be successful because I'd already done it once before. And that's incorrect at this point, right? And that's something that I've matured in. And when it comes to building teams, it's better to grow an opportunity and then try to find and build trust in new networks, right? And find additional individuals in building those teams. Whether that's through recruitment agencies or placement groups like yourselves, or going out and actually doing the network. And you know what? If you fail in finding someone they're not the right fit, move on to the next individual. You can't let fear of failure in building a team prevent you from meeting new individuals, because there's a lot of great people that I've been able to expand in our team building in the last probably 5 or 6 years that wasn't part of my original group that followed me around. And we've been better for it. The company's been better.
Yeah, I think there's the tendency there's that comfortability of like, oh, I've worked with this person before. Maybe we scaled the company together. If I bring them to my next startup, we'll probably have the exact same results, which is usually not the case, right? Just like a lot of people say, well, the team that gets you from 0 to 1 is not going to be the team that takes you to your Series A or something like that, right?
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what it
Um,
is.
so, just a little rapid fire to close out the episode. So, what's a tool or workflow that's changed how your team operates at Healthier?
Ah, immediately ChatGPT, and utilizing AI. I mean, you probably get that answer every single time. But I would say
Nope.
if we know, so a tool workflow,
Well, it will
ChatGPT.
be an AI tool, an
Yeah.
AI tool maybe, but not always ChatGPT.
Okay. So I can break it down a little bit more specific in terms of departments, but when it comes to like business oriented, finding solutions, finding information, finding help docs, etc., ChatGPT has been pretty remarkable in terms of finding solutions to problems that you have, on a day-to-day operational basis. It also has made communication, writing user stories, right? I can go in and I can have it, put in some thoughts and actually have it spit out a very detailed, user story or a detailed ticket for my team, whether that's on the infrastructure side, the security side. So that has been pretty remarkable. If we break it down to some of the departments overall, our dev team is starting to implement. They've been utilizing Copilot for development purposes. They're looking at Claude as well. Infrastructure and security, we utilize Vanta, and Vanta is like a compliance automation platform that really just kind of outlines everything. And we've been able to couple that with some AI workflows that pulls information from there, wraps it up, sticks it into our ticketing system. So being able to cut time on some of the dumb knowledge transfer stuff has been significant. So in terms of our department, our teams, those have been some of the key tools that we've used that have really kind of cut down our time and efforts, and we can focus on other aspects that don't quite have that type of automation yet in place.
What's a piece of leadership advice someone gave you maybe earlier in your career that turned out to be totally wrong?
Immediately that, and this might be dumb, but I had a previous boss that was kind of creating an analogy and said, people on the freeway try to weave in and out of traffic to try to get to their destination faster. When if they realized that if they were just to stay in one lane, they would get there at the same time. And there might be some dumb data statistic that's tied to just staying in one lane and going. I don't know how traffic, but the point that they were trying to hammer home was like if you just stay consistent and you're not changing and pivoting and looking for the next opportunity in the next window, you're going to be at the same place. And I can say that that's completely false. That's not how it works. If you stay in the same lane at the same speed and you're not looking for windows of opportunity to advance you down the traffic line, then that's what is called complacency, and you don't grow from that point.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I'm sure again it was built around some data statistic of, you arrive at the same time, but life's not traffic. But no, you need to be looking for opportunities. You need to be looking for lane changes. You need to see where you can speed up, where your potential slowdowns are going to be, and you need to adapt. So I would say that was the one that was completely wrong. As silly as it is, that's kind of the first one that comes to mind.
I like it. I like it. And last question, having started multiple orgs and teams, if you were starting a new org, what would be the first hire you would make?
Are we saying that this would be a technical software startup in context? First hire I would make is I would probably hire sales and someone with an existing network. And I say that because of the tools that are coming into place with the resources that you have around the development, around my own expertise in terms of designing products and having them built. There's a lot of products out there, and there's a lot of people that have built some very, very good products. But what they lack is they lack a sales network. They lack a sales engine. And so the first hire and even first partner that I would look for would be someone who already has an existing network that aligns with the product or problem that we're trying to solve. And, that sales network, that communication, that's something that can't be done via AI. It's not something that, 20 other people are also doing the same thing. It's not going to drive that competitive. It's going to allow you to bring on the market. So I would say that that's the most important thing and where I would
Yeah,
start.
that makes a lot of sense. I think a few years ago the answer probably would have been software engineer all day. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense now. Logan, thanks for coming on the show. For anyone listening that sort of wants to stay connected or learn more about what you're doing at Healthyr, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to healthier.com. They can send us an email. We do have, classic LinkedIn, Instagram stuff, but go to our website and we can get you connected with our commercial team and they can provide you all the information you need. So.
Awesome. So that's it for this episode of Tech Teams Today. If you like the conversation, be sure to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next week.